So, um, deltas. Delta is a Greek word, and it connects languages, it connects spheres. I'm sure you understand what is there written, but you could imagine that this word here is dialogue over there. Yes. So, we wanted to highlight the idea that we're using a letter, and delta has this form, this shape that recalls what a delta of a river is. So, certainly there was a lot of domain, many ideas, many questions that we discussed, and it was not easy to summarize all of them. So what we want humbly, Ayman, Rabi, and I, is to select a few ideas, a few conclusions, and raise the interest for your reaction and continue the discussion. Okay? So we do not pretend to cover all the main conclusions. It's just a selection of what we thought it was more interesting, more relevant. So, challenges in delta management. First, environmental hydrological challenges. Sediment flow disruption with upstream dams, sand mining, reduced sediment supply causing riverbed erosion and delta degradation. I'm sure we will all remember these ideas, these processes. We will bring that home clearly memorized for the future. Coastal erosion and land subsidence, that involves sea level rise and land sinking, which accelerate coastal erosion, creating coastal squeeze effects on deltas. We are using some of the words that the presenters use because they certainly help us understand the idea of coastal squeeze. Saltwater intrusion impacts. Saltwater encroaches on freshwater zones, harming agriculture, drinking water, and ecosystems. And not the least important, to hydro, climatic extremes and pollution. Droughts, floods, and pollution degrade water quality and increase vulnerability of delta ecosystems. But there is a human factor here. In many of the presentations, they were identified. Population pressure and urban expansion. That's clearly the case in the Mekong Delta. High population density in some areas and rapid urban growth strain land and water resources in river delta. Environmental degradation, that comes with agricultural intensification. Land use changes degrade natural habitats in deltas like Amazon, Parna, including Mekong. And remember, in the delta, they used to have 3 crops per year, and the yields stand amongst the highest in the world. So this is really very, very productive area. Maybe too much. Community environmental degradation and community vulnerability and displacement. Horrible words, displacement, human displacement. So communities face reduced access to resources and risk displacement due to environmental and economic pressures. And that can also affect human health and economic risks because of contaminated groundwater causing health risks, while economic dependency on delta resources create instability. So health issues, health impacts, and economic instability. Moving on to governance and institutional challenges. Fragmented governance systems. We talked here a lot, many things about transboundary. Many delta regions face fragmented governance and weak transboundary cooperations. There's, of course, policy conflicts that result from diverse goals, diverse perceptions, diverse social needs, and of course, short-term focus. And these two things together hinder integrated delta planning, which requires a long-term perspective, clearly. Third, marginalized local participation, limited or no non-local involvement and power imbalances reduce decision-making effectiveness, and it is not fair as well. Data gaps is also a challenge and creates institutional mismanagement and also creates scenarios which certainly are characterized by the lack of transparency. So poor monitoring and misaligned institutions complicate informed and adaptive management. Moving on to funding and financial arrangements, financial barriers in delta management. We were informed that managing a delta is very costly, and many deltas suffer from limited funding, which hinders effective management, especially in transboundary deltas. We need innovative instruments, but certainly they're the most difficult, and they're even the most difficult in transboundary deltas. But we need them, and that the fact that we don't have them limits as well investment in delta preservation and all the governance structures that are needed. Equity in financial access. Financial instruments must ensure fair access to resources for all stakeholders in delta regions. So we need sustainable financing strategies like climate funds, blue carbon credits, partnerships are key to boosting delta resilience. And now, I'll ask my colleague, Ayman Rabi, to continue with the conclusions, moving on with the lessons learned.
Thank you very much, Alberto. And yes, indeed, just emphasizing what Alberto was saying, we tried to summarize, but we are not claiming that we captured everything, but we tried to categorize as well these lessons learned under three major topics. Like the first one is what is the challenges that we have been talking about, what are the kind of lessons learned, and what are the policy recommendations or policy directions that we can see or we can take away from this 12th International Forum of Rosenberg. So what are the lessons that we also think they are relevant? Of course, deltas are systems, not sectors. And therefore, of course, integrated basin-to-ocean approach should be the way to go forward and not the siloed management or sectorial management issues alone. Upstream actions always affect downstream impacts or results and outcomes, and therefore, basin-wide cooperation is really essential. Nature-based solutions, including the hybrid approaches, is something that will enhance resilience, as we say, and therefore need to consider them for either upscale or at least testing and upscaling so that we can also ensure that our actions are sustainable at local as well as basin level. Pollution control is really critical for both water security as well as public health. Surface and groundwater must be looked at together and must be managed together for both quantity and quality, because we cannot ignore really one. It's not either or. It should be really together because they are interlinked. Science and policy interface also must be strengthened through data collection, data sharing, and citizen science. This is something that we also discussed yesterday. It will come, I think, today as well, and therefore this is something also very crucial. Equity and justice, as also some colleagues mentioned, justice is also very important element here. So we are not really ignoring or leaving anyone behind in terms of development and access to resources. This is something that we need to consider. Policy alignment and enforcement. not only across basin countries, but even within administration, as Dr. Tree has mentioned in his presentation. Alternative solutions, it is important to introduce alternative solutions in order to derive policy change, because without alternative solutions, it will be difficult really to convince people and farmers in order to change, and even the policymakers to change. Adaptive governance, community participation as well, and co-production of knowledge is also improving sustainability and ownership of any kind of recommendations or solutions proposed. And finally, adaptive governments enable flexibility and responsiveness. Of course, this is the cases in some like other deltas. So these are in terms of like what summary lessons I would say that we captured. And when we talk about like policy directions that we thought, we also categorize policy directions under different subtitles, like for example, under governance and cooperation. We said it is, of course, basin-wide governance is really essential in order really to strengthen it, and therefore to enable coordination actions among multiple countries for delta management. Integrated delta planning is also essential because it has to be a holistic planning approach. It is not really sectorial, as we mentioned. So we need to link land, water, energy, and food systems to meet short and long-term needs of the people and in the delta. Adaptive management, like we need to institutionalize the adaptive management to promote flexibility and learning to address climate uncertainty and other, of course, challenges that facing deltas. Inclusive and aligned policies, this is also another important topic that has come also in the presentations, that we need to make sure that inclusive governance respect local and indigenous rights and aligns policies across, of course, borders and sectors as well, so that we can ensure that it is all aligned together. Under environmental resilience or sector, we are talking about sediment flow restoration. We need to restore sediment flows. This is also something that came in the presentation. By regulating sand mining, help maintain delta stability and, of course, ecosystem health. Land subsidence control, this is something that we need to limit groundwater abstraction or regulate it at least, and provide alternative water sources to reduce land subsidence. Sustainable agriculture, we need to consider climate-smart agriculture or at least salt-resistant crops, integrated farming systems like rice shrimp rotation, and this will improve the sustainability. Again, nature-based solutions, the mangrove restoration, floodplain reconnection, and wetland, of course, conservation. It will buffer the disasters and support the ecological system within the deltas. Under the socioeconomic equity recommendations that it is important to protect the livelihood and ensure that climate resilient agriculture and fisheries are there in order to reduce poverty and support local livelihood in Delta region. Safe water supply to be ensured, and therefore we need to make sure that arsenic is mandatory testing so that we are really not leaving any potential for any public health or rural supply problem. Social safeguards, developing projects must protect vulnerable communities and population in order to avoid any kind of displacement in the deltas. And financing and innovation, this is also another part of like the recommendation that we are talking about, like climate fund, green bonds, as you know, also mentioned earlier, as part of the challenges. So we need to address and to see what type of innovative financial instruments and mechanisms that we can also derive so that we can ensure having sufficient fund for delta restoration. Data management, monitoring and investment. Of course, we need to invest in monitoring and modeling and, of course, early warning system so that we can support timely decision making, and this is also part of the challenge and recommendations. Innovation and research hubs, we need to create research funding and local innovation hubs in order to enable testing and scaling of adapted solutions. Finally, I think we need to also look at the knowledge and capacity of the different, let's say, constituencies of the deltas, like science policy interface need to be enhanced so that we can promote effective delta management. South-South cooperation between the different countries who are sharing common, let's say, problems need also to be promoted so that we can ensure, of course, experiences and customized solutions toward like the different problems that facing the deltas, because as we also mentioned yesterday, there is no one size fits all, and therefore each delta is unique in itself and has to have its own solutions. But of course, lessons learned from other deltas to be adapted in the deltas based on the situations that we are facing. Building local capacity, we need to have also trained people with a good capacity to be able to manage and to meet the challenges that we are taking about, not only, of course, in the field of agriculture or ecology or resilient, let's say, systems in hazard mapping and in other related sciences and skills, so that we can be sure that this kind of skilled people can really be on the top of managing these things. And finally, promoting sustainable development will focus on inclusive growth and resilience in river deltas through nature-based and early warning solutions. Now, if we just want to have a very quick wrap up to all these kind of, recommendation, I would say the lessons from the 12th Rosenberg Forum highlights that while deltas face diverse local pressure, their challenges share a common thread. They are products of cumulative, interconnected human and nature processes. Addressing these requires systemic, inclusive, and science-informed approaches that transcend political boundaries and short-term development priorities. Building resilient deltas means investing not only in infrastructure, but also in institutions, people, and ecosystems, ensuring that these life-supporting landscapes continue to nourish humanity and nature alike for generations to come. Thank you very much.
So now we have 30 minutes or 25 minutes to discuss about this and react and maybe comment on this. So let's open the floor, and anyone that can that wishes to talk, let us know. No?
Well, thank you very much for the great summary. I have a question. There was no discussion about whether there is flow requirements as the river goes through, multiple countries. For example, in the US, even for the Colorado River, there are agreements that certain percentage of the flow has to be delivered, for example, to California and Mexico. I wonder whether such policies exist for Mekong River and how forums like this could inform, maybe better allocations for both managing water and sediment transport. Thank you.
Anyone can respond. We're not experts, but I think maybe about your question, somebody has any idea how to respond. I'm not too familiar with the case that you studied, you mentioned, but yes, please, you have the microphones on your table, so please, Susan, do you want to respond? This is the dialogue.
I think Mark as well.
Or Mark.
It's on now. I think we can do it together. No, so there's no such allocation, but I was more triggered to say something because I think there has been a lot of discussion in international basins to move towards such flow allocation, but I think this is highly problematic because what we've seen from the few treaties that exist between countries that allocate flow is that they're typically creating more problems in the end because often absolute flow volumes are being allocated, or even percentages only, but then countries get into all sorts of issues, especially with climate change. I mean, a well-known example is Afghanistan, Iran, where you have allocated for the Helmand, in the Helmand Treaty, very specific flow volumes, and even with certain exceptions defined, the whole thing fell apart for many reasons, but one of the reasons being that the river itself doesn't carry enough water anymore to meet any of these defined allocations. And I think especially now, where we see more push to look at resources in a national way, look at sovereignty, I think moving to flow allocations is something very, very tricky and potentially creating more conflict. Mark, did you want to add anything?
So then,
it's about managing it as a whole rather than dividing, which is often the lowest common denominator that we arrive in the MRC. So, yeah.
The places that have done that with more success have done it as a proportional allocation, because you're right, if you make it a volumetric allocation, at the negotiating table, everybody negotiates it up high, assuming there's a lot more water in the river than there's ever going to be, which is what we've done on the Colorado River and many other places, just because it's an easier negotiation that way. But if you have a proportional allocation, then you have to agree on where is the location that you're going to be taking the proportions from and who you're going to allow to do that, and that's a harder thing to negotiate.
Can I?
Jennifer,
Just
do
on
you want
that-
to react to that?
Well, the World Bank, I mean, there's a lot of people who've been working, trying to support countries who are responsible for trying to come up with agreements on how to negotiate transboundary water. I'm looking at our friend from Egypt here. I mean, the important thing is really, a lot of times it's more of a framework and principles that are really, really important rather than volumes or percentages, and especially during different times of the year, you know, if there's certain shock circumstances. Good example, Senegal, OMVS is a really interesting river basin organization. I think Suzanne mentioned it this morning, because they financed infrastructure and shared infrastructure. So it's about, you know, the benefits of the infrastructure, be it for irrigation or hydropower or river navigation, river flow. And so you have several countries that actually have those shared benefits if you're doing river flow through the three countries. And so, but that's the biggest challenge. I mean, I don't want to put Egypt on the spot, but that was the biggest thing with the GERD in Ethiopia when they built that Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, and Sudan and Egypt. What was the negotiation? What's the contents of the negotiation? It was really much a declaration of principles, and the most important thing is data sharing and transparency and building trust, right? And I think that's and being able to be flexible in the process.
On the Columbia River, we divided not the water, but the hydropower revenues, which was more meaningful.
Good.
Yeah, thanks. Two maybe different kind of thoughts here, and I'm not sure if these probably aren't controversial at all, but they certainly helped me, this whole discussion about engaging with local communities in understanding how to do science and what kind of science you're going to do. I'll preface it by saying we often hear this phrase, and I've used it often, evidence-based policy. And what's the evidence from? And so I find a different phrase often more appropriate. It's evidence-informed but value-based policy. And when you think about putting value-based policy in front, you start thinking about local communities a lot more than if you just say evidence-based policy. And the discussion about, you know, how you bring in local communities, Ori, Ajami, and myself have been on a task force for about 10 years, a Salton Sea task force. And it looks at, you know, how we're managing this ecosystem now in Southern California that has really negative health effects on lower income communities of color. And slowly we've migrated more towards science or citizens-based science. And when we go down there and we start talking with these people, one of the things that we always, at least I hear, is enough with the studies. Let's see these projects get going. And there's certainly that goes along with this attack on science. And what I feel is that my response is, you know, we have to see if these programs that you want implemented right now, whether they're effective. So we could be spending a lot of money and not getting any return in terms of your health if we don't monitor and measure these things. And so I realized that as the sooner we bring in these communities into engaging and being co-partners in the science, the more likely they're going to see that we need to keep doing the science, as opposed to think of these as two mutually exclusive activities. So anyways, this whole discussion, I think it was your comment that really prompted me to think this way, so I appreciate that. So anyways, I'm not sure there's anything controversial here, but I just wanted to share my thoughts.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to comment?
Two short points. First, I understand protecting ecosystems from climate change. So yeah, I understand protecting ecosystems from climate change, but also the question is healthy ecosystem protect people. So that's a point that we can consider this one that we're discussing with humanitarian organization. The second point is I like, of course, water, food, and energy, and it's a good way to measure sustainability performance of W of cities. I would advocate to add construction. We saw how sand is important, and construction is as important as energy, as food, and as water. And in the report, the UNEP report that was endorsed by UNEA, we advocate as the first recommendation that sand is strategic. It is relevant to so many dimensions of development that we may have a case, certainly if we don't have it for the deltas, we don't have it elsewhere, a case to add the construction dimension to the nexus.
Yes, I really like your comment, Kurt, right? It's about the science and value-based, but I think it's also about changing the way we see science and we conduct science as well. I'm a social scientist, so I know how it feels to be quite marginalized when you talk about science. And I think we need to see evidence also in terms of science-society relations. And I think it's also the right timing because more and more transdisciplinary science actually emerging. So it's about not only doing science by ourselves, but also starting with the challenge, with the problem, and then investigate what can we do to actually solve that problem together with the community. So I really like the pointer about co-production, but maybe we can be more radical rather than co-production. Because it seems like the traditional co-production right now is usually, citizen science or science information, so it's about informing, but actually not. We can collaborate more than that. We can start together with the problem, co-definition of the problem with the community, and also while doing science, really kind of having a regular interaction and monitoring together with the community itself. It's not to exclude a very fundamental science, we need that, but I think more and more there should be these science-society interactions that is more than, the usual informing, science information, but it's not just informing, it's about collaborating in a meaningful way.
Okay, I wanted to maybe make a comment on one of the summary slides, and I think I wouldn't go as far as mandatory testing for arsenic just yet, because the risk is not uniform across the delta, and you do need to rely on these existing risk assessments, because that I would rephrase it a little bit, risk-based arsenic testing requirement. So that's just one comment, but I do want to follow up on Kirk and Natalia's comment on science-based evidence or value-based evidence. As I get older, I just feel like a lot of the times politicians give money to scientists, whatever kind we are, to defer the real solutions and the money needed to solve the problem. I'm very cynical, but I see that happening my entire life. So I feel privileged to be able to give him money to do whatever I want to do, but I just remind ourselves, all of us in this ivory tower, we are not the real community.
I think that's really very true. In California, for decades and decades, the state would spend probably $5 or $10 million a year investigating new dam construction opportunities. And why did they do that? I think it's because that's lower than the cost of building a single dam. And it would just take it off the table politically. And it worked for a long time.
I'd like to, I read a little bit about the Proposition 120 of the Vietnamese government targeting rice growers. The goal is to transform production techniques in 1 million hectares in the country, in the Delta. And it not only attempts to change the 3 crop per year to 2, but many other things. And I wonder if there is anyone in the room that is more familiar with this program and could inform us about how farmers have participated in defining this program and how, and whether it is successful or not, because it's not compulsory, it's voluntary for farmers. So is there anyone in the room that knows a little bit more about the Proposition 120, which I think is incredibly ambitious in the Delta?
Viet, do you
Jennifer?
I don't know, Viet, you want to, I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe you want to start and then I can come in.
Actually, 5 years ago, the Vietnamese government and we try to respond with the sea level rise and the climate change in this area via the big project. The project has named that it 1 million hectare for this area and to reduce the carbon emissions. But actually, for this project, we try to apply in some new skill for the farmer. It's like how to control the water level on the rice fields. But you know, just it depends on the irrigation system. So we need to invest more the money and also to improve the irrigation system, like a canal, like the open gate, or maybe try to modernize in some equipment in there. So that's why that is very hard, and we can do in some pilots project. Yeah, it's very helpful for the farmer, but we try to expand, but it's no more money now. So that's why we think another way. It may be that we can get the money from the government bond. We try to do is maybe for the next year for the previous of the Vietnamese government we will redo again. Thank you.
Can just add a little bit on that one, because that's the interesting thing, having worked in Vietnam and left and come back. The continuity is just watching how this research, at different levels and pilots go to scale, and like you were mentioning, Andrew, this morning, get transformed into policy, right? And then again, how do you scale it up? The 1 million hectares of rice, it's trying to reduce the methane emissions, which is huge, right? As methane emissions is the most important thing you could do. And it's not just going from triple crop to double crops, but like you're saying, Viet, it's water management. It's how do you do alternative water, wet and dry, AWD. And so now there's been very successful in Vietnam, there's a lot of work going on in Indonesia, China, and other countries doing that. And the World Bank was supporting trying to look at methodologies so that it could be approved. Because the question in carbon markets, because then you want to take this into carbon markets, either be voluntary or compliance markets, and to agree on a common methodology, what your baseline will be. So it's gone really, really far, and like you're saying, the government is really ambitious. They want to make this into a $1 million hectare program, and that's where they're looking for that financing. They're in conversations with a number of people, but trying to bring also some private finance and some carbon market finance into there to incentivize this behavior change that you want in farmers, but you have to make sure that you have good quality irrigation. Because a lot of farmers also just, flood their fields because they're afraid they're not going to get water when they need it. So it's that whole, it's constellation of how you need implementation, policy, science, and the farmers all together, right? So it's an interesting program.
Thank you. Any other comment? No? Well, I guess we will close this session and move on to the next one then. I think this is now involves Andrea, I think, a regional, yes? Oh, yes, Eric. Excuse me. So, are you ready? Okay. So, okay, let's make the break. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.